dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll.
Matt, are you ready to get to Pathfinder?
I'm ready for extra Pathfinder, Tokyo Drift. We're ready to go. This is, of course, the sequel. We're talking about the second Pathfinder, right?
That's right, yeah.
The sequel to a movie with a guy who's raised by indigenous people in North America, but actually he's a Viking.
He's a Viking.
And then he has to kill his family when they come back.
He has to fight the Vikings using indigenous folkways to yes. It's not true. I think he just does Viking shit to other Vikings. It's an incredible premise for a movie. This is so weird because I was just talking about this with a friend of mine. Such an incredible premise for a movie, so poorly executed, just absolute dud through and through. It's even got what's his face? It's got Carl Urban and it's got all the tools, all the ingredients for a great dumb historical hack and slash movie, and it just ends up being a snooze fest. Missed opportunity. It's
funny when Pathfinder, the role-playing game, which is what we're going to talk about today, first came out. I remembered when you Googled Pathfinder, like the first thing that like came up was the Nissan Pathfinder, and then like the fifth thing that came up was this movie, and then the like 10th thing that came up was the Pathfinder role-playing game. But no longer Pathfinder is the first non-advertised link. So congratulations on Pathfinder on beating the internet.
Excellent.
And I tested that in an incognito window. Don't tell me it's just my algorithm.
Yes, excellent advancements in search engine optimization. Pathfinder, the role-playing game, is no longer behind a mid-tier car and a bottom-tier movie. It is now where it belongs. And we're, as perhaps some of you were aware, there's a lot of discussion about if you want to switch from 5th edition to another game system. And I think there's
Rob, all the time, strong DMs, big GMs, beautiful DMs. They're talking to me after one of our shows, and they have tears in their eyes, Rob, and they're saying, "Mad Rob, please teach me how to play another game. Tell me about Pathfinder. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." Rob, it's more and more we're seeing this.
We see it. It's more and more people are mentioning it, and yeah, we're here to answer. I think there's a strong argument to be made that the most natural, the easiest transition from 5th edition is to Pathfinder 2nd edition. Now, I don't want to say that this is a hard and fast truth. It really kind of depends on what you like and what you're good at as a DM, or what your players like about 5th edition. But in terms of just raw mechanics and system similarity, Pathfinder 2e is very, very similar to 5th edition. It should be a relatively natural transition in terms of play.
Right. It's close enough that you could, I don't know, switch. You don't have to do this, nor should you, but you could switch, systems mid-campaign, right? Like
yes.
Pretty much everything in 5th edition has a corresponding class, monster, etc. in Pathfinder.
It would,
because they're the same game. They're at the end of the day, they're really similar.
It is a D20 based dungeon
fantasy
crawl tactical strategic RPG with, again, the same shared ancestors. This is Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, folks. Like they can breed. They recognize each other as anyway. It's close. Now, with that being said, there are some critical things that you need to be aware of as a GM in making this switch. And there are a lot of really good videos on YouTube about how to get started. And so we're not going to go over the basics of the game. We've already done that. We've already discussed Pathfinder in a couple of previous episodes. What we're going to talk about here is what I think you need to know, or what we think you need to know about going from 5th edition to Pathfinder 2nd edition, or back and forth. Now, the only reason you should listen to us is because you like us, or you like, our opinions, because I am not the most experienced Pathfinder second edition DM. I have GM'd way more 5th edition and Pathfinder 1st edition games. I have GM'd a fair number of 2E games, and I have a lot of experience switching back and forth, so I think my experience is useful. But I don't want to present myself as an expert on this. There was a time when I had absolute system mastery of Pathfinder 1st edition. I knew everything there was to know. I have never gotten there with 2nd edition, so just be forewarned.
I was they came out with a new printing of the Pathfinder 2nd edition rulebook, so I downloaded it, and I saw my like shameful page of downloads of all the purchases I've made from Paizo over the year. I'm like, oh, I have 86 Pathfinder 1st edition books, like adventures and things. Yeah, sure, okay, when you buy an adventure path, you're buying 6 books, but still, it's a lot. Books.
It's a lot.
It would be several shelves if they were real.
Yeah.
So one thing to know is you can get the PDFs. You can just buy the PDFs. It's so great. They're cheaper too. Amazing. PDFs should be cheaper. So that's one thing to know. The SRD for Pathfinder is really complete in that, your players probably do not need to buy their own rule book. Now, if they like art and stuff like that, they should. But if they have a tablet, a laptop, even a phone with a website, they can like look up their spells or abilities on that stuff, right? It's great.
Yeah. This is actually a really important thing to highlight if you are coming from 5th edition. 5th edition has an SRD, and you can find some rules on D&D Beyond, but frequently you will try to look something up and find that it is gated or not available or different or difficult to find. That does not happen with Pathfinder 2nd edition. If it is in the core rulebook, you can go to Archives of Nethys, and just look it up. And it not only will you find it, it's formatted basically the same as the core rulebook. You will have no trouble finding the rules. If your players do want to buy the PDFs,
not to be too nitpicky, but not just the core rulebooks, but like the other classes, expansion classes too.
No.
It's like, imagine you had a D&D Beyond account with every single thing purchased.
Yes. This is a big, going back 15 years, this is a big reason why I started playing Pathfinder in the first place. I'm one of those big dorks who actually believed, in open source and sharing information, and I loved that early era of the internet, and I always liked that Paizo seemed to really believe in that if you shared information openly and were a good company, that people would buy your stuff, and I think they're right. But I think you will find that if you are used to using D&D Beyond, the tools that are available to you for Pathfinder 2nd edition will blow you away. Not only is the SRD easier to use, but there's tons of character creation and character management apps and tools and websites. There's a ton of them. They're really good. Path Builder is a great tool if your players are trying to figure out how to create their characters. So not only do your players not need to buy anything to get started, but if they do want to buy something, like Matt said, the PDFs are cheap. They also came out with these neat pocket editions of all of the books. Pocket is a misnomer. They will not fit in your pocket, but they are much smaller. They're paperback and they're cheaper. And so even if your players want to have something to look at the table, they do not have to buy a gigantic $60 hardcover. This is one of, again, a key critical argument for 2nd edition over 5th edition. So with that out of the way, I do want to, one thing is important to highlight before we start talking about specific things. And I think Matt knows what I'm going to say, but Pathfinder is a very specific type of game. Just like Dungeons and Dragons is a very specific type of game. Now, 5th edition has been, I don't want to say warped or mangled, that gives the wrong impression, but modified heavily to fit many, many tables and many, many different types of games. But as we have mentioned multiple times, 90% of the rules in the book are about tactical combat. And it is
Yes.
much the same in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if your players enjoy a tactical combat RPG, this is a good game for you. And it does other things well. I think the rules for social encounters, like all the skills are written in a more interesting way than the 5th edition skills are. I think they allow for a lot more out of combat options, but I should be very clear that if you don't like grid-based tactical combat, maybe you should play a different game.
I think
Different
it's a difference. It's a different system, but like the biggest difference is one of perception. 5e is a tactical combat game where you will find 1 million people in this country alone who play it as something else, right? And they're like,
Right.
"Oh, we almost never play combat. We only do that every once in a while." And with Pathfinder, because the player base is smaller, you'll find plenty of people who do a similar thing, but they're just not as many. So you'll get a different impression of the community, I think. Yeah. So it's a difference of perception, kind of, and scale.
I do want to make a point that Critical Role, the game to end all games, the table that we all wish we were sitting at, started as a Pathfinder game. Matt Mercer, despite being a talented actor and loving to do all sorts of things that are not combat, likes tactical combat and runs a game with that as sort of its core. And I am not caught up on Critical Role, but most sessions involve a tactical combat encounter or two. I think this is a really great way to play RPGs. I love this. I think that, centering your games, even if 75% of them are exploration and social interaction and whatever around a fun, dynamic combat encounter, is a lot of fun. That's the type of RPG I like to play. But if you are wanting to switch away from 5th edition and your group doesn't like combat, there are a lot of really good options that I think you should explore, which we'll talk about and we have talked about. But if you are using the Sturm und Drang of the OGL and Wizards of the Coast as a opportunity to look at other options, definitely take this time to be sure that this is the type of game you want to play.
I think that's a very fair warning and caveat for everyone out there. The other big thing I think to be aware of, and this is just general sense, and one we picked up on like our first review of the Pathfinder 2e playtest, is just the way the rules are written. 5th edition, in the sort of pendulum swing of how Dungeons and Dragons gets written by its various owners, went back from a very clearly defined, lots of keywords and bulletin points of 4th edition to kind of some loosey-goosey natural language. And so if you're coming from 5th edition to Pathfinder 2e, it's swung the other way. Things have clear keywords that have values. A lot of actions are clearly stated, like this is how long it will take. This is what exactly you need to achieve success. This is the exact consequence of failure, right? You can compare the rules for Pathfinder 2e for something that's in the SRD that anyone could look up right now, like for hiding or the stealth skill for those written in 5th edition. And I think that gives you a good impression of how the rules are written in a different type of cadence and syntax.
This is one of the most important differences. And I have said before that even though the entry point was a little bit more difficult, I ultimately really like 2nd edition because I find that I have to do a lot less adjudicating myself. There's always an answer, or there's almost always an answer. You do have to know where to find the rules, and you have to be a little bit more familiar with them, but it involves just a lot less judgment calls from the GM. But again, having switched back and forth multiple times, I will tell you that it takes some getting used to, because it is night and day from the way that the 5th edition rules are written. So as long as you're aware of this going in, I think that it's fine, but it is something that is going to take a little getting used to.
It's not natural language. It's more like a coding language or a textbook language, right? A game language.
Yeah, textbook game programming language, and you don't have to be like a numbers person or a programmer. I think it will help. I think if you are that type of person, if you're a data dork like Matt and I are sometimes, like some things just like really make a lot of sense. But even if you're not, it's not written so mechanistically that you can't understand it. Like you're not actually like reading code. It's just structured in a way that everything relates to something else in a very clear manner. You just have to know where to look to find the answer.
I think a small aside here is that I know a lot of our listeners play virtually on a virtual tabletop, and I think Pathfinder has done a really good job of making, packaging, or selling, or someone else has, a lot of their adventures that are available as pre-packaged deals to virtual tabletops like Roll20 and Foundry. There's even some free ones, though they're often intros to longer adventures that you want to buy the rest. But they are really good. They're really nice. The maps are great. The like dynamic lighting is there. It's really good in that there's tons of art and icons and handouts, and they're organized really well. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that Paizo started out as mostly writing adventures, and their adventures are really good. They write really good adventures. They always have some of the best full-length campaigns and one-shots and, mid-length adventures are from Paizo. And like Matt said, they're really easy to run on a virtual tabletop. So if you are playing online, it's really easy to get started, and they give you a lot of tools. But also, if you're not, you have a lot to draw from. It's just as easy to homebrew as 5th edition, but if you don't want to homebrew, I would say that it's like Matt and I have reviewed half a dozen plus 5th edition Wizards of the Coast adventures, and we spend about half of those reviews talking about what needs to change to make the adventure work. That is not necessary with a Paizo adventure. That there's of course things that I would like to change, but 90% of the time they're ready to run right out of the box. They've just been thought through, in my opinion, a lot better by actual GMs.
Yeah, I feel like Paizo, as part of their review process, must have like a team of highly trained like plot hole people. Now, not to say I've never found one or been absolutely confused and baffled by a Paizo module. That's definitely not the case, but the frequency is less.
Yeah, there are weaknesses to be sure, but you're not going. Here's the thing. Let me put it this way. I'm thinking about Skull and Shackles here. You can run everything as written, beginning to end, and it will work. It will not necessarily be all that satisfying, and Paizo has in my opinion, a reputation for their higher level modules kind of falling off compared to their lower level ones, but they do all work together. And
yeah, it seems like the review of every adventure path. Man, that was a killer opening adventure. Great follow-up. Middle, getting a little lost here. End, where did this come from?
Yeah, who's this person? Why do I care about this? That's okay. I think this is a great recommendation. And if you are somebody who is thinking about, I just want to try Pathfinder, I think that it is really easy. You do not have to spend a lot of money. You can get any number of interesting modules just to try and virtually jump into them really easily. But they give you a lot of the tools. So if you are feeling intimidated by Pathfinder and you've got $20 to $30 to spend on it, I would just, get yourself a module and a PDF of the core rulebook and just take a look. And that's really all you need to get started. So that's the sort of any other big picture stuff we want to talk about with Pathfinder?
Oh yeah. Unlike, I guess, 5th edition, which only has a couple of games that are connected to the rules, if you are the kind of person who's like, oh man, I love playing a computer role-playing game on my own time. It doesn't drain me in the same way. But like, I love playing ones based on role-playing games because they like help build my system and world mastery and get thoughts going. There are 2 for Pathfinder 2nd edition that are pretty good. They're by Owlcat Games. They're, I think, Kingmaker and Wrath of the Righteous, which are both adaptations of adventure paths. And they are janky. They are hundreds of hours. They're buggy, can be brutal and unforgiving. But if you're like, oh, I really like Baldur's Gate 2 style role-playing games on the computer, those are 2, and I think those are a fun way to get into the system.
I'll be honest, I bounced off of them, but not because
which is saying something about
I know
about their depth. Because
I'm the biggest like crunchy RPG nerd, and I'll probably at some point sit down and play them. Not because they weren't fun, but if they do have good reviews, and a lot of people seem to like them. And if you want to just get a feel for the system and the setting, which is pretty cool, Matt makes a good point. It's, they can serve the same function that like Neverwinter Nights or Baldur's Gate 2 did in previous editions.
What about, okay, I guess I could briefly say big picture things. Just most of the stuff we're not talking about isn't different, right? Again, this is not a basic video, but you roll D20s, you compare them to DCs. Right. That's the basic action. There are classes, there are levels, there are 20 levels, there are monsters. They're all there. The classes are all basically the same. Everything is very, very similar, right? All of the assumptions of D&D are similar. Unless we bring it up, it's probably exactly the same.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about classes or feats or ancestries or backgrounds because you can look them up. And again, it's mostly the same. There are some mechanical differences that I mostly like, but it's, you could easily, for most classes, just pick up your character from 5th edition and transfer it over to Pathfinder. I will say, you can't do that in the reverse because there are some unique classes in Pathfinder that I think are really difficult to model in 5th edition, like the Inquisitor and the Alchemist and a bunch of others, which I think are really cool and really well designed. But again, it's the same thing, right? Unless you're paying super close attention, a session of Pathfinder 2nd edition will look a lot like a session of D&D 5th edition.
Right. What did you say about the scale of Pathfinder 2E in the
let's get
big
into
picture?
We're getting into the mechanics, which I think are important as a GM. But one thing,
right? This is the mid part of our episode, just like the mid part of a Pathfinder Adventure Path. It's going to get a little wonky and weird, and we'll say, "Where are you going?"
This is something to start like steeling yourself toward, but while the general everything is generally the same in how it functions, the scale is radically different. And by that, I mean the numbers are bigger in sort of like every direction. So we'll talk about how proficiency works in just a moment, but because of how it works and because of the numbers that you're adding, you're going to see things with ACs of 30 and 2 hits of, plus 18 pretty quickly. Like that's easy to get to. These are numbers you will never, ever, ever, ever see in D&D 5th edition. Just don't panic. The math all makes sense. It's just there's a difference in sort of just the overall size of the numbers that you're rolling. It's a little bit how in Shadowrun you roll whole fistfuls of dice to, it's just a different system.
And I can say from the player end of a Pathfinder 2E game, like big numbers are fun. Like it is cool to be like, I have a plus 21 to hit, or I have a plus 25 in stealth or something like that. And you're like, damn, you must be good at stealth. Whereas in 5th edition, you're like, okay, I have a plus 8 and I have advantage most of the time. That's a big number in 5e. It works about the same, but
you'll hit about the same. You'll have roughly the same impact. You'll just be rolling higher numbers. It's also nice because it allows, I think, you to distinguish your character and your, from others. Like if you were a fighter that specialized in using your greatsword, you will roll very high numbers when you're swinging your greatsword. You'll probably do the same amount of damage as your ranger buddy, but you'll be really good at using your greatsword, and that feels nice. Again, as from a player perspective, it feels good to like be able to be very specifically good at one thing or the things that you want to be good at.
Right. 5th edition with its bounded accuracy takes away having big pluses to players, which again wasn't really a thing in D&D until the tail end of 2nd edition or 3rd edition, but in Pathfinder 2e they're back, and they're a great way for your players to feel like they've progressed. When your fighter's like, I had a +6 to hit the beginning, +7 to hit, now I have a +17. I know I'm that much more powerful. When we're fighting some guards, I'm never gonna miss these.
Mm-hmm. Now we're gonna get into things which I think that if you are moving from 5th edition to Pathfinder 2nd edition, that you really should be aware of. These are the things that tripped me up as a GM most often. And I think that if you're aware of these, and these are mostly mechanical things, but if you're aware of these, you will have an easier time getting started. And also, these are things that you need to sort of prompt your players on so that they're aware of them. But if you master these, again, small number of concepts, these are all the major differences. So I would say the most important thing for you to know about and to just be familiar with in Pathfinder 2nd edition is proficiency. And proficiency in 2nd edition works a lot like it does in 5th edition, with a couple of major exceptions. And I like these exceptions. So if you ask me right now to tell you what the progression is for 5th edition proficiency, I would probably get it wrong. I can guess. I can tell you maybe when it goes from 2 to 3 and 3 to
5th level?
Fifth level, maybe? I think, and then
4th level?
8th, it goes to 4.
Should
Here's the thing. I probably got it wrong. I definitely couldn't tell you after that. Pathfinder, it's very simple. There's 5 ranks: untrained, trained, expert, master, and legendary. And starting at 0, it goes up by 2. If you're trained, you get a +2, expert +4, master +6, legendary +8. Now, here's the tricky thing. Again, this is tricky for me, maybe not, I don't know. You add your level, right? So already you are probably understanding how numbers can get quite large if you are even at a modest level and you have a lot of, or a high proficiency in something. Proficiency applies to everything: skills, attacks, saving throws, your perception.
Armor class.
Armor class is a big one, right? This is a big difference from 5th edition. But as long as you are remembering, again, the flow chart is your player wants to do something. Great. What's your proficiency in that particular action? And there will always be an answer, right? This is the nice thing about Pathfinder 2nd edition, is that is explicitly tabulated in their class and their background. So they'll be like, I want to fire my bow. Great. You have an expert proficiency in bow, your 2nd level. Dun, dun, dun. This is your 2 hit. All of that being said, you have to make sure that you're not forgetting to add level and that you are checking what that proficiency is every time you take an action.
Yeah, the proficiency system is fairly intuitive. It looks insane. I have to be honest.
It does.
To a player when you look at the character sheet, which is, I think, a big flaw and a thing you'll want to help your players get over, because the proficiency thing makes their character sheet look insane. But once you just explain to them, this is just how much time your character has devoted to getting good at this different things, and there's 4 levels of it, and you have one of these levels or you're untrained, then it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, this is a problem that not just Pathfinder has, but the character sheet does the system no favors. There are third-party alternatives that are a little bit simpler, but character sheet design remains an elusive goal. Someday we'll find a perfect one, but yeah.
I've come around on the character sheet for Pathfinder Second Edition, but again, when you first look at it, it does look a little crazy, and you have to remind everyone it's just a way to do math quickly.
Yeah.
And there's only a couple things that you need, and I do like that those things are in specially shaped boxes, like they've got a heart or a shield on them, or an axe or an arrow. And it's like, oh, good, thank you. Yes, thank you for doing that.
One refrain that I want to keep, yeah.
Do you remember that like joke character sheet? I've tried to look it up and find it. If listeners, if you can find this, please send it to me. Of like the ultimate character sheet where it's like different things in the boxes are like special dance moves, skill with katana, magic spells.
I do remember that. God,
number of Pokemon. Like it had everything on
everything.
there. Yeah.
One thing that I keep coming back to with Pathfinder is that initially it looks insane. Like I showed the core rulebook to a friend who loves TTRPGs but has never played D&D, and he like physically recoiled when I showed it to him because it's so big. But then I opened it up and was like, look, it's organized by like a textbook, and he was like, oh, that's great. That's so much better than I was expecting. And this is the thing, is that there's a lot of information, but it is, again, in my opinion, there are disagreements, but I think it's really well organized. And if you take the time to get familiar with it, I think it makes a lot of sense. But if you look at it initially, a lot of it is very, very complicated. Speaking of, the other main thing, again, and this is mostly combat related, but that you need to be aware of is action economy, which is distinctly different than 5th edition, but in my opinion, much better. Every player gets 3 actions a turn, not counting
encounter things in a combat round. Yeah,
in a combat round. Sorry, in a combat round, not a turn. Sorry, I got to be precise with my language. There's things have meaning in Pathfinder land, and they can use, again, every action has an associated action cost. So moving, which is stride, is one action. Strike and attack is one action. There's other things that are varieties of this. Spells have action amounts. What it boils down to, though, is basically you can move and attack sometimes twice most turns if you are a combat character, and you can usually cast a spell or two and move if you're a caster. Again, very much like 5th edition, but there's substantially, believe it or not, fewer rules, right? You don't have to check if a spell is a bonus action or whatever. It'll just have like a little like icon that tells you how many actions it takes to cast that spell. And
you've got to know the icons. Thankfully, the players have them on their character sheet,
yep.
Right? It's just, these nice little symbols that translate to free action, single action, double action, triple action, or reaction. And like that's pretty much all there is. And then once you know that, when you're looking through a spell description or even the description of a skill or an ability, like it always lets you know what kind of action it is.
Yeah. So this is a little different. It's just something to be aware of. You have to get in the habit of looking for those little icons. Again, after spending some time with it, I think it's much better. It's very intuitive, but it is different and it's going to take some time. So just something to be aware of. It also means that your players can easily do things like move, attack, move. There's no, like, you can just do that. There's 3 separate actions. Also, make sure that, so you can also attack 3 times if you want to. You just take a action penalty for each attack beyond the first. This is called the multiple action penalty.
Multiple action penalty.
Just make sure map. Make sure that your players understand this. It's great to be able to do or to know how to do. But yeah, it's just that simple.
I think when you take the way actions work in Pathfinder and you sit down and you play a game, from the player's perspective, one thing to be aware of as game masters is it does create a mind shift, a paradigm shift. Your mental landscape changes. Whereas in like 5e, a player is more likely to be like, well, I want to get up on top of the ledge so I can push something off on someone. They'll just say that's what they want to do, and then you might have to say, okay, well, you will have to jump over this crevasse first, and then you'll have to climb up that rope, and then you'll have to decide if any of those need a check or an action or something like this. Players, because of this action economy that's presented to them, think in terms of those three things. So they'll say, I'll do a move here, a climb here, and then a shove at the top. Or if those things are like not allowed, then they'll come up with something else. Players will describe what they want to do, or instead of describing what they want to do generally, they will do three things.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that, right? That is just how players will start to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Paradigm shift is a good way to describe it, because it is, again, this is the difference, right? There's less natural language and more precise rules, which means there's more rules, which means here's 12 things that you can do during an encounter, right? These are the actions that are available to you. As it turns out, that's not 12. I don't remember exactly how it is, but like those things cover most of what you might want to do in a combat round. Not everything, and there's still room for improvisation, but generally it means your players can be like, okay, I want to stride, climb, attack, or I want to stride, jump, attack. I want to jump, etc. It will make some things easier, some things harder. I am not going to come down on better or worse. It's just different. I will say that I think it's easier as a GM to run.
Yeah, I think you want to have, at least for the players or every couple players, like you can find it if you Google it. It's the like Pathfinder actions and activities cheat sheet, which has the symbols next to every one of the like basic actions, right? So like delay, that's free action, whereas ready, that's an action, right? Aid, that's an action plus your reaction when you do the aid, right? Like all those things, stride, okay, that's the one that's an action. Step, that's the free action, right? Just so your players have all of those. They'll eventually, playing in the game, you memorize these. Like yeah. I feel like I know most of them, but having that cheat sheet, if you have some spare printer paper and a working printer out, printing that off is super helpful.
Yeah. So the other big thing, whole system thing, just to keep an eye on, and this is traits and keywords, right? So every or almost every feat, spell, ability, whatever, has associated words, boxes, right? If it's a dwarf feat, it'll say dwarf. If it's a divination spell, it'll say divination.
These are words of power.
Yes,
they have meaning.
Right. This is mostly an organizing principle, but it means that, if somewhere else it says all divination spells get a +1 or whatever, you know exactly what that applies to, right? Does your spell have the keyword or the trait divination, right? Easy peasy. This does mean, again, this is sort of a data, certain type of gamer mechanistic way of thinking. Ultimately, I think that this makes things easier. It is a big change. It is another paradigm shift. It takes some getting used to. You have to remember to be on the lookout for these things, because sometimes it is very important to certain abilities and spells and game mechanics, but I don't think it's insurmountable, but it is different. This is, it's different. It's substantially different from how 5th edition works.
Right. Yeah. The keywords are important. They're important for searching. They're useful. If you have like the searchable hyperlinked version of the SRD rules. But yeah, they're, they can trip up players at the beginning and they're like, what do all these words mean? And you're like, well, it doesn't really matter for what you're trying to do right now. It actually does matter a lot for other things. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another thing that I think is important to highlight going into this, is degrees of success.
Oh yeah.
And I think this is I think this is a pretty big change. I think this is an important change, but a good one. And it's not complicated, but it just means that in terms of rolls, if you get 10 over the DC, it counts as a critical success. And if you get 10 under, it counts as a critical failure. Or sorry, it counts as a 1 degree of success higher and 1 degree of failure lower.
Right.
If you've played other systems, this is a familiar concept to you. It is relatively unfamiliar to pure D&D players, and a distinct difference from 5th edition.
The thing that will be familiar is you still go yay when someone rolls a 20 and when someone rolls a 1, because those change your degree of success, up 1 or down 1. But it doesn't mean that like a 20 is always the best possible success.
I really like this change. It means that you still automatically succeed, or at least partially succeed on a 20, and you fail on a 1. But if you have a really high number and you roll a 1, you'll still succeed. You just won't succeed quite as well. And, you know, it gives you an opportunity, even if you're attacking or trying to do something that's beyond your ability, that you still have a little bit of a chance of succeeding. But it also means that you don't have to roll a 20 to get a really exciting, like, big number, right? You if you are trying to hit a 15 DC and you roll a 25, you still get to feel cool, even if you didn't roll a natural 20.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you get that bonus because you're like, oh, I have a plus 13 in this, rolled an 18, I'm still kicking ass. It works out great. The one thing you have to remember from the dungeon master's perspective, game master's perspective, is you do want to like jot down on a sticky note when someone says they're doing something, what that exact DC is. If you got into the lazy 5e habit of being like, well, the DC is somewhere around 10, I'm going to think of it, whatever. Oh, they've already rolled. Okay, yeah, 15, that's a success, right? Because you want to be a little more precise so that you can award those critical successes when they're appropriate.
What is nice as a GM is there's a really cool table or a really cool section on how to choose DCs. And it makes it easy. You do, like Matt says, you shouldn't just flub it, because it is going to matter a lot more. You want to make sure that you know what the DC is when you ask for a roll or a player attempt something. Again, just something to be aware of.
Yeah. Like some quick things, like there's not weight anymore. There's bulk. Bulk is equal to 10 plus your strength modifier. I don't know why it's not just your strength score. We don't really use scores for anything. In 2E,
someday
maybe that's
we
why.
will be free of scores, but
yeah,
maybe next edition. I don't know. Someday.
So everything has a bulk, and then that's how much you can carry without being encumbered.
It's
pretty
much
easy,
simpler.
but just yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to keep track of how many pounds of ball bearings or rope or whatever. It tells you how much bulk it is. You add it up. It's great. I love the system. Let's see.
Modes of play. We've talked about these on the show before, but everything's divided into either encounter, 6-second rounds, exploration, which is, I think, 10-minute turns,
Something
or downtime, which is just a more vague amount. These are just kind of suggested ways to run different things. You don't always have to stick to these exactly, but they're like nice guidelines to let you know how fast your game is moving at certain points. One thing to be aware of if you're switching to this is things like monsters, especially high-level ones, can have exploration and downtime abilities, so that Pit Fiend, that the evil sorcerer that summoned and broke out of their control, is now rampaging the land. If he has a downtime action, like, he's going to create some more devils with his downtime.
Yeah. The one thing here that has tripped me up is exploration. And like Matt says, you don't have to do this, but there are a lot of rules for how to run exploration, and they make a degree of sense. They help you adjudicate as a GM what happens if the players are surprised or come across something, what their marching order is, how their perception works, etc. again, this is something that I find not intuitive because I run exploration pretty laissez-faire. I always have, but I think they're good rules. You can take them or leave them. I'll just let you know that they, you know, if your players are reading the book and they come to you and they're like, oh, are we in exploration mode? I want to be, we want to follow the leader, and our ranger is using hide or whatever. You should probably know how that works.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't care, then you're free to not pay attention. I really like the downtime rules. They're not as complicated, but they just add some. 5th edition did eventually add some downtime rules that I liked a lot, but I just like Pathfinder's better. They're baked into the system a little bit more. And they don't require like a ton of prep. It's just like, we're in downtime now. Here's some things you can do. Here are the rules for them. If you're like me and your players are like, I want to go shopping, or I want to dance a jig and, earn money at the tavern, or I want to go spy on my enemies, then there are rules for that. There's a lot more rules for that make it just a lot more easy to run downtime.
Okay, so next up is a super simple thing in concept, but it can be kind of tricky, which is not all bonuses in Pathfinder 2e stack. So if you get 2 of the same things that buff your character, only the best one applies. This was true in earlier editions of D&D, but it's not really a problem in 5th edition because there's so few bonuses. So just keep in mind that each bonus has a keyword. If they're the same keyword, only one applies.
Yeah. Again, if you're familiar with 1st edition Pathfinder or 3.5, you know how this works, but it's not a thing in 5th edition, or not really important. You will get a lot more bonuses. This is a pitfall, maybe not, just something to be aware of. Something that I appreciate, but I'm going to tell you right now is kind of a headache, is the rules for detection and concealment are substantially different than they are in 5th edition, because they're kind of non-existent in 5th edition. Sorry, they don't make any sense whatsoever. There are degrees of concealment, everything from observed to like
laser focused.
Yeah, I forget the thing, and I don't have but to hidden. Anyway, they just sort of describe as like a condition, your state of how aware the enemy or the somebody looking at you is. This is good. It means that you know exactly what is required to use abilities like sneak attack or other, stealthy things, and either you are or you are not meeting those conditions. But familiarize yourself with those rules because they are not
yes.
like 5th edition at all.
Yeah, they're very different. Another thing that you want to be aware of as a dungeon master is that leveling has a lot more options and choices in Pathfinder, and the best approach, I think, is it could often be probably starting at 1st level. The class chapters are, all about the same length. And so if you're used to coming from 5th edition where there's like just kind of a couple paragraphs that you have to read, it can be a little overwhelming. But like, sit down, look at one class, especially one that a player is going to play, and say, okay, I'm going to read this first page over with them, help them check off the things. And then really they have like 1 ability they get or 2 abilities they get, and then they get to pick a 1st level feat. And I should know what those 1st level feats are as a game master. And so I can be like, okay, you want to do a lot of damage, take this one. You want to be a cool flex person, take this one, right? There's only one decision you really have to make at 1st level, but there's more decisions than you have to make in 5e. So be aware.
There are just generally a lot more options, and this is cool. Every class has several abilities to choose from, more or less every level, and on top of feats and other things. But this means that rather than just saying, okay, at 4th level you get an ability score improvement, you're gonna either have to trust your players, or you're gonna want to be familiar with what those options are, and there are a lot of them. This is probably the best and worst thing about Pathfinder 2nd edition, is that it's just a lot more to be familiar with. And if your players are the types that are going to want to try to abuse the system, that makes it harder on you. If they aren't, that's easy. But also, if they're the types who are not going to take to this material very easily, then that puts more pressure on you. This is the other thing that I would say that you should just, as a GM, be aware of. This can be the heaviest lift, is trying to make sure you know what your players want to do and should be doing with their classes. Again, this is a problem I like, but I'm not going to lie and say that it's not a lot of information to keep track of.
Yeah.
Spells work much like 5th edition, but with some differences. There are more traditions, right? There's primal and arcane and divine and
Occult.
That's right. Sorry. Again, this is mostly flavor, but it's not exclusively flavor. Remember those traits, keywords. Also, all spells can be heightened by preparing them in a slot higher, which is neat. It's basically just a built-in meta magic, but if your players don't know to use that, that's a problem. And lots of classes have focus spells, which are basically like free spells, or actually, it's exactly what it sounds like. They're focus spells. They're spells they can cast often and better, but they work a little differently. Again, none of this is too radically different, but it is more to know and keep track of for a caster. Also, prepared casters actually have to prepare and think through what they're preparing. I hate fancy and casting. Sorry, it sucks, but we're still here. We still got fancy and casting, and it's hardcore in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So just let your players know they need to be specific about what they're preparing.
Yeah. Next up is hero points. You get one at the beginning of every session. You can use it to re-roll a die, or you can spend all your hero points to not die when you have the dying condition. Again, like many systems, the rules are very vague for when you should give players additional hero points, which always kind of sucks. I always err on the side of give them more. But that's something to be aware of. They're fun. It's very similar to the inspiration system. So don't be too afraid of hero points.
Yeah. I don't think it's too difficult to keep track of. It's just one more thing. I like it. Like Matt said, I err on the side of giving more. I don't think I have ever said, boy, I wish I had not given a hero point or a bonus or a Benny or a inspiration. So, but yeah, just a thing to keep to keep in mind that hero points are a thing. All right, let's talk briefly about some stuff that's specific to DMs. Or GMs. We talked a lot about what's in the Game Mastery Guide and Game Mastery stuff in a previous episode, which I think covers a lot of this. Some things that you will need to know how to do that are not in 5th edition that I want to cover. Hazards. So this is gray area because hazards are basically traps, but hazards also includes natural environmental hazards and haunts, which are spooky traps. But it all works the same way, but again, the hazards are much better developed in Pathfinder than they are in 5th edition. I think they are easier to design and easier to run, but you can know everything there is to know about traps in 5th edition in like a page and a half, and then you're just kind of making it up. That is not the case in 2nd edition, or in Pathfinder 2nd edition. The
quick thing I'll add is hazards seem complicated. You're like, man, this is a lot of text for, a smoky room or smoke-filled room. But once you've seen enough of them, you can kind of make them up on the fly.
They've got, again, there's a bunch of words. There's a trigger and an activation and an effect and a duration and blah, 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 blah. But all of this, once you know what you're looking at, it all makes sense. It's very straightforward and it's all very helpful. And you know exactly what your hazard is going to do. But this is not something that you can just wing because it is different. Similar are afflictions, which covers diseases, poisons, curses,
bad spells,
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Again, the rules for these are very clear. There are a lot of them. There's a lot of words on the page. But once you understand what you're looking at, I like this because it makes poisons, drugs, disease more impactful than they are in 5th edition and more interesting to use. But there are a lot more rules around them.
Yeah. There's a lot more item complications. Like your items can be a lot more specific. Magic items are assumed that your players will get some and will need them. There's a lot more minor magic items that have very, very minor effects. You can upgrade and customize your weapons, like you're in a computer role-playing game. You can put little runes on your swords and stuff like that. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, 5th edition has gotten by on 7 years now on not answering the question about whether or not players should have magic items, how much they should spend on them, whether or not they should get them, how much they cost. Pathfinder does not do that. There's a wealth per level. There's specific rules about how items should work. Again, once you learn the rules, this will make being a GM easier, but you have to learn the rules. So just prepare yourself because there's a lot of them. There's a couple of different types of items. It's not a big deal, but there's talismans, which are basically like magical potions, and they have activations, so you can trigger them to like do extra damage as you attack, or to make your shield more effective as you block. Again, it works just like any other consumable. It's just sort of like a neat little thing that you can have. I like these. Like Matt mentioned, there are runes that you can attach to your weapons to make them a little more powerful. There are rules. They're not complicated. There's little like mini traps called snares that your certain classes and players can make that can sort of like toss out. Again, I think this is a nice rule change. Again, but this is more rules. These are more rules for you to know. And yes. I really like the items. I think I've said this before. I gotta say, it is a lot of fucking rules to keep track of. I think they're really neat. It gives me lots of ideas. I've had lots of fun villains with, bizarre items, alchemical whatsits. It makes giving your players loot a lot more fun, in my opinion. Like, there's just so many cool things to give them. But it's just a lot. It's just, and this is, by the way, I am just talking about the core rulebook. There's so much more in. There's whole gear books out there, which are rad, but that's just like more things to keep track of. Oh, I should have brought this up at the beginning.
Sure.
Make sure that you are discussing with your players what books they are using. It's up to you whether or not you want to limit them, but if you are just like, go hog wild, grab everything off of the archives of Nethys or any book, they may come to you with just some like absolutely off the wall stuff that you are not familiar with. This has happened to me, by the way, because I have not read every single book. You may want to limit your players to just the core rulebook. I think that's fine. I think there's a lot in there, but that's your decision to make. I will let you know that if you don't do that, it's not like in 5th edition where you might get somebody with Green Flame Blade. You might get somebody who's playing a Pumpkinhead Leshy with, a laser whip. I mean, it gets real out there. Just a forewarning to potential GMs.
If you want to keep it a little more complicated, but like still in the realm of, okay, don't find, because there are people who make, third-party content for Pathfinder. And sometimes you will find that third-party content on like freely available sites, which can get very confusing because they made it open content. If you don't want your players to use that, I would say core book plus the advanced player's guide is all pretty manageable.
That's what I would do too. Unless they want to play a specific class that's not in here. I think there's a couple that are in other books, but that should be plenty in my opinion. One last thing that you should be aware of, shields. Raising your shield is an action.
Shields.
Raise shields. Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Shields are important in Pathfinder.
There's this is maybe like the major failing, maybe the biggest. I don't know if it's a failing. There's a flowchart for shields, like a pretty complicated flowchart for how to use your shield. Ultimately, I think it makes shields more interesting and fun to use, but it reminds me of the grappling rules from 3.5. It's just, I know why it is this way, but I'm just like, why?
People have made flowcharts. Once you have to make a flowchart for rule, you wonder if that should be exactly the rule.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's fine once you get used to it. I think it's more fun to play a character that uses a shield and you get to do cool things with it. But just know that you just don't if your player wants to use a shield, they're not just getting a passive +2 armor class. It's more involved than that. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. Yeah. I think that this is basically a list of things that tripped me up and that I think are most distinctly different. Like Matt said, if we didn't mention
if we had to go in depth on this, I think that's the best approach, right?
Yeah.
You've done this. This is what happened to you.
Yeah. Like Matt said, if we didn't mention it, it's probably mostly the same. Now, like I said, we didn't talk at all about classes, which may seem like an oversight, but like I said, there's lots of good introductory videos and other people who are covering this who will talk about classes in great detail. They mostly function like classes in any D20 system. They just have cool different rules. The things that we mentioned are the things that are going to, if you're not paying attention, cause the most headaches at your table for both you and your players. So anything else we want to cover? There's more. Obviously there's more.
Yeah.
But I mean,
don't forget that like a lot of your Dungeon Master rules, unlike in 5th edition, are in the core rule book, right? Like, remember when we talked for 2 episodes about the Game Mastery Guide and we talked about all the cool optional rules and other ideas it encounters, is because a lot of the like nuts and bolts stuff, like how to use XP budget to build an encounter, like look at your little table. Do you want to make this a hard encounter or a trivial encounter? Here's the numbers. Like those rules are all in the core book, right? So that's something that confused me when we were looking at the Game Mastery Guide. I was like, oh, those were back in the core book.
And it's really nice because the Game Mastery section lays out in very like explicit terms. Here's how to design an encounter. Here's how much XP your players should get. Here's how much loot they should get. Done and done. You don't have to follow those rules directly, but if you're just looking to have something to reference, it's tremendous. And it's all right there. It's all in the core rulebook. Well, I know a lot of you asked for this and are thinking about switching. I cannot emphasize enough that if you are interested, you should just do it. You should just run a one-shot or a short adventure. I think that if you have run 5th edition, you will find it pretty simple and your players will like it, I think, for the most part. Especially if your players like even just like a little bit of crunch, or if they like making interesting characters. I think it's so much more... All the cool things you can do in 5th edition, you can do in Pathfinder. All the same like ancestries and weird, types of people, plant people you can be and do, but there's just like a lot more character and class options. So I really want to encourage you to try it. Yes, some of the material is intimidating, but I promise you once you dig into it, it really does make sense.
And of course we couldn't cover everything, and after you've listened to this and fucked up and you've had a player complaining about why can they not make an attack of opportunity with their champion, and you forgot that only fighters have attacks of opportunity, or one of the other tiny changes that you will have to read the book, but I think these are the like big things to be aware of.
So if you have questions or thoughts, or if there's something else that you would like this treatment for, either a basic how to play or a how to switch, like we have discussed, Matt and I would love to do more of other systems and talk about things that are fun and not depressing. So I think we'll be doing more of these, but I hope that this was useful. We'll include some links to resources and some of our previous discussions. But hit us up on Twitter at DM of None, or write us at dmofnone@gmail.com if you have thoughts or questions that we didn't cover.
Let us know what's your favorite Pathfinder adventure or module. We've covered, I think, 2 or maybe 3 of them. Maybe we're due for a Rise of the Rune Lords deep discussion, since that's out for 2E, I believe. Maybe there's another one we're not aware of.
I think it's time for us to talk about some Pathfinder adventure paths. So if you have a specific one you want us to discuss or a favorite, let us know, but we'll be doing some of that. As always, thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.